Welcome to American Pulse. Our focus this week will be on the state government and how it supports its constituencies. Today, my first guest will be the Assemblywoman for New York State, Ms. Nicole Maliotakis. The Assemblywoman has been named in several newspapers as a rising star. She was born of parents from Greece and Cuba, and they migrated to America. Welcome to my show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for making the time and the interest to talking to my viewers about your experience.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. First, if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I ran back in 2010 because I was sort of just fed up with the direction of the state of New York. We had seen a $13 billion deficit accumulated here in the state. We saw tolls rise, fares rise, service was cut. The bus that I had to use to go to work in the morning was eliminated completely. So I was very frustrated, as were many New Yorkers. And I ran because I really just wanted to be a part of the solution and working with my colleagues to try to fix some of the problems. I came in with 26 new assembly members. We were very dedicated to reforming state government. And I'm very happy to say that we've achieved a lot of success. We've been able to close that $13 billion deficit. We've been able to make bus restorations and other transportation improvements. And we're seeing things change in Albany for the better.
Have you seen any challenges being a woman, taking that part and role and rising up and saying enough is enough?
Well, I think in many ways, it is a challenge, certainly. But being not only a woman, but being a Republican in a very democratic state. I'm one of two assembly members that are Republican from the city of New York at 64. That just shows you how outnumbered we are. But we play a very important role, and that role is to push back on bad policy. And any two-party system needs that. They need that challenge. It needs to be debated. All these issues that we're taking up in Albany have two sides, and we need to be able to debate those things so we can filter through to really make sure that we're adopting the better policies for the state.
Before we go really deep into politics, do you mind if you tell me about your family a little bit?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I am the daughter of immigrants. My father's from Greece, my mother is from Cuba, and they came to America for I guess you would know as an immigrant yourself.
Yes.
They came here to America for a better life. My dad came in 1964. He only had $50 in his pocket. He worked very hard to build his life and start small businesses and working his way up until I was born, and he helped me go through school and always supported me, and my mother as well. My mother left Cuba in 1959 to escape the regime of Fidel Castro, and they met here in New York. And really, I guess that is the American dream, that is the New York story, and only in New York can a Cuban and a Greek meet, get married, and have a family.
Yeah, so you witnessed the real deal of having the American dream.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very proud of being able now to serve in government and really exercise the democratic values that my mother had to flee her country because they didn't have that ability to do so. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about government, and really is what got me involved in the first place. It's really what motivated me to volunteer on campaigns, get involved in the process, and I think that's important for everyone to do.
When does the signal starts to you to tell you that you have to move on? You have to think what you should do next. How do you know?
I think it's, right now I'm very passionate about what I do and where I am, and I feel like there's still a lot of things that we need to do on the state level. But it is an exhausting job. It is not easy. It's many hours, there's many demands. As you know, my district was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy, and for the last 2 years, a lot of my focus has been on that. My office has helped thousands of people recover, and we're still helping people recover who are still struggling past the storm. We're trying to get them the federal dollars that came to the city and those dollars to the people. and we're fighting every day for many people, and I think it's very exhausting, mentally, physically exhausting. But again, I think it's the passion that I have for the job, my community, that keeps me going. And for the future, I would say that's up to God and my constituents where they want to see me go.
Sure. Hurricane Sandy was a big destruction to Staten Island region and part of Brooklyn Bay Ridge area. Can you tell me the amount of damage that happened there, and how were you able to recover from that?
Yeah. It was very difficult. I was in my second year as an assembly member, and so it was the first time I had ever experienced anything like this, and many of my colleagues who have even been there longer, first time they've ever experienced anything like this. And it was a very difficult period. The days after the storm, we came together as a community. We were delivering supplies, delivering food, delivering water, blankets, clothing, all up and down the streets of the beach areas. And then things progressed from there. We did community cleanups to try to get the debris removed, and we had thousands of volunteers that came. It was very, very difficult period for myself, my staff, my colleagues, the people of Staten Island specifically that I represent. And if you look at my district, actually majority of it is the flood zone. And so I've had thousands of people affected,
you, right?
thousands of people affected, and it's just it's been very difficult. But you feel gratitude in being able to help people, and we did our best. We did what we could, and still to this day, as I mentioned, there's still a lot of red tape, a lot of complications that we're working our way through. So trying to help small businesses get back on their feet, helping people who did not receive any funds from the federal aid yet to try to get them dollars that they need to finally get back whole and back in their houses. And that's really what my focus has been over the last 2 years. It's barely occupied a majority of my time.
Do you have a lot of Arabs, Egyptians in your district?
I have a very diverse district, and we have so many different ethnicities, and I think actually my district is probably a perfect microcosm of the city of New York. When they say New York's a melting pot, I think that's really exemplified in my district. We have a large Italian population on Staten Island, have a lot of new immigrants coming in, Russian, Turkish, we have somewhat of a Greek population still. We also have many Irish. And in Bay Ridge, we have those ethnicities plus a very large Arab population. So I have many constituents who are from Lebanon or Syria or Palestine or Egypt. And it really is, I think, a beautiful district because it really encompasses almost the whole world in one 11 miles worth of the city of New York. My district is about 11 miles long. And in that 11 miles, you can almost eat any type of food. You can go to any type of religious service, and you can meet any type of person from across the world.
How are people there living together if they're so diverse? I mean, different religion, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. Do you see any problems with that?
Well, we have had instances of religious intolerance, but they're very isolated incidents. So we've had some incidents in Bay Ridge against the Catholic. There was a vandalism in the Catholic church. There was a vandalism to a Greek church. There were stones thrown at a service outside a mosque. There was also vandalism to a Jewish center. So there has been isolated incidents over the years where the police have worked very hard in arresting those individuals and bringing them to justice. But we have, more importantly, a task force of individuals, community leaders that have come together to try to address some of those issues. And we stand together united whenever there's any type of expression of hate or intolerance. We stand together as a community and we denounce it. Regardless of what religion it is or what race it is, we will stand together collectively and say that this is not what this community is about, that we support one another, we live together, and we are a community, and we don't tolerate that type of behavior. So I think that collectively we've been able to really tackle any issues that have been isolated and small, but yet we've been able to tackle it right away, working with also the police in making arrests.
So the point that I'm trying to get to is not just not being in America, there's no problems. There's always problems, but the difference between being in America and being outside America is here that we have strong laws and regulations, and people come together. We can tackle these problems, we understand them, and try to see how can we prevent them in the future. And especially you're saying those were isolated incidents, right?
Yeah.
So this is the point that I want to get to. Problems are everywhere where people are different living together. It's the only difference that how can we attack them, how can we approach them, how can we solve them, and how can we prevent them in the future?
Yeah, and I think it's setting an example for our children and future generations, whether it be an issue like this of intolerance or whether it even be something as preserving the environment. I think it's important how we behave and how we act is going to be reflective in our children and our grandchildren. So if we want to make this world a better place for future generations, we have to start with ourselves. And I think that's sort of the message that we've been communicating, and we've been doing a very, very good job of that in Bay Ridge specifically. Of working together and trying to be an example for future generations.
I know you're big on protecting children from criminals, and as well as serving the senior citizens. So you're selecting the extreme ages to protect. Do you think because you felt that they need help?
Well, I would say that they are the most vulnerable populations, both our seniors and our children. But really, I think that my efforts have really helped everyone with different issues, obviously. Like we fought very hard to try to lower tax rates here in the state of New York for the middle class families, and we've been very successful. We have the lowest now tax rate in 58 years. It's the lowest in New York, I'm sorry, as it's been in 58 years, and that's significant.
Yes.
But aside from that, I've been paying a lot of attention and really pushing, trying to expand the tuition assistance program here in the state of New York so more middle class citizens can qualify. I have many constituents who are struggling to pay for school. They're taking on a tremendous amount of debt. Families are working multiple jobs. And so we want to try to give the tuition assistance program a boost so we can get more middle class families to qualify for it, as well as restore the program for graduate students, which was eliminated in 2010. So that's been a primary focus of mine as well, trying to fix the economy, trying to work to create jobs, lowering the tax burden on our businesses. We've lowered the corporate tax rate here. We've eliminated manufacturing taxes here. We've also helped eliminate a hidden tax in utility bills, which was something I fought for many years, even before I was elected. And these little things I think are helping everyone. But of course, I think children, seniors are vulnerable populations, and we have to fight for them. And seniors especially, they've worked their entire lives, they've paid taxes their entire lives, and they need to benefit from what they've invested in the community. So we never want to close a senior center. We never want to take away benefits from our seniors or our veterans because they've earned it. They've worked very hard their whole lives and paid taxes for those things. And most of them are on fixed income, at least in my district. And they're whatever they get now, we need to preserve.
What do you expect from your residents in Bay Ridge and Staten Island to help you succeed in what you're doing for them?
Well, I think we've been very successful in doing a couple of things. One is restoring transportation services. Another one,
getting very expensive.
And we as I mentioned, we had lost significant bus service in my district. And in fact, today I was endorsed by Amalgamated Transit Union, which is the bus drivers union, because of my efforts on transportation issues. And I think we've done those things collectively with the community, getting them involved, getting them to sign petitions. Just making sure that they know that they need to participate in the process. They need to come to Albany and fight back on the bad policies they don't like. They have to get involved and be vocal and contact the governor, contact the mayor if you don't like something that's going on, because they're very responsive to that, and we've seen that take place with different projects that we've worked on throughout the years. And I think you get the government you deserve, and that's the truth. And so when people are active in the process and they're vocal about what they want and what their needs of the community are, they're oftentimes successful.
You've been called the top-ranking pro-job supporter by the Business Council of New York.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of them. There's a group of us that are very economy-focused, very jobs-focused legislators that understand what basic economics are and how the economy works. And I think that what we've seen over the years is, again, a movement to not only reform Albany, cut the wasteful spending, let's reduce the tax burden, not only on residents, but for businesses as well. Back in 2010, we saw, just as an example, we saw taxes increase, but then we saw simple things like the sales tax exemption on clothing under $110. That went away. The STAR rebate program, that went away as well, because they drove up spending so much that they started to cut all these things, and therefore we were paying more taxes. They put an MTA payroll tax on all businesses in the state of New York, including all the small businesses and our schools. See, these are the things that were bad policies, and we've reversed that. We've repealed the MTA payroll tax for small businesses. As I mentioned earlier, we cut the corporate income tax here in the state of New York. We eliminated manufacturing taxes here in the state of New York, so we can help these businesses survive, grow, and they can reinvest then their profits to expand their business and create more jobs. That's how the economy works.
See, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the difference between the tax system in the U.S. and Egypt is a big difference. In Egypt, they can't seem to be able to enforce people to pay taxes at all, or even on time, and then every time the government would come up with a new law, try to help, because this is how economy works. You said, trying to get people to pay taxes in order for them to get services, people complain. So we have a almost the complete opposite problem in Egypt, is people nearly paying nothing and the government struggling. So where can we find the balance? Paying to the government so we can receive the services back, and paying not an extreme amount of money, and paying enough to be able to survive.
Yeah, well, the thing is that every government needs taxes to function. That's how they operate the budget. But the thing is to operate the government in a smart way, not with big bureaucracies or red tape. I mean, there's so much waste in government that can be found, a tremendous amount. Here in the state of New York, I think we've done a good job. As I mentioned, we closed a $13 billion deficit.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, we have a surplus now, a $2 billion surplus.
That's amazing.
Right? But we did it without increasing taxes. We did it by cutting wasteful spending. We did it, that's the way we focused on merging agencies, combining some of those agencies that were doing duplicative work. And so I think, and also making sure that we help the economy, so you created jobs, and there you get more tax revenue as a result. And that's the proper way, I think, to go about it. So, it's important that they have money to operate. We have to make sure it's being used properly and not wasted.
And this is the key word, to be used properly.
Yeah, well, the issue is that your people are working for this money.
Yes.
Each and every day they get up and go to work, just like you and I, and they are working very hard for this money, and they give you a portion of it at the end of the year, but they don't give it to you to waste on nonsense. And I think in Albany, that is often lost in the translation, is that they feel that it's their money and they can do whatever they want, it grows on trees, and that we live in this utopia where, you have unlimited tax dollars. Yeah. And that's the wrong approach. And so I think with the 26 new members that came into the Assembly back in 2011 when I got elected, that was one of our things. Our real focus was to kind of get that message across. And I think we've been successful, and a lot of the policies I mentioned are a result of that.
Sure. I'm sure you heard of what's going on in Egypt in the past few years. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's been a very interesting and difficult time for them with the changes of the government. But I applaud the people of Egypt fighting for democracy, for standing up for what they believe in, and I think that in many ways they set an example for other parts of that region of what can be done when people truly believe in something. And so you know, from my Egyptian friends, I hear that things are getting better. As we had a conversation earlier about this, and I think time will tell, because it's been a very rough 3 years for them, and we'll see what happens in the future.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming to my show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Welcome back to American Pulse. My next guest is a state senator, very distinguished, very hardworking man, Senator Tony Avella. Senator Avella works for the Senate in Queens, in Bayside to be exact. He graduated Hunter College. In 1997, he was awarded New York State Community Service Award. In 2002 to 2009, he was a member of a city council. In 2005, he received a humanitarian award. In 2009, he received the New York City Human Rights Award. A lot of awards. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming. Today we're talking about the state government and its role and how it supports the people. So if you don't mind, give me an idea of your work as a senator, what you do for your district, and if you can give me an idea about your district as well.
Well, the state senate works with the state assembly and the governor of New York to do the laws for the state. And you know, people may think it's the Senate, we deal just with legislation, which I do, but a lot of it is still do the local issues. People talk about education, about traffic, about the things that affect everybody on their everyday lives. There's an expression that we have in New York politics that the average person is more interested in fix my pothole. In other words, the pothole that's in front of their house. And that's what a lot of things that I do. I do the big things and I do the small things, and I'm very happy to do that. As far as I'm concerned, if it's an issue for my constituents, it's an issue for me, no matter how big, no matter how small.
What's the population in your district?
Well, my district is 350,000 people approximately, and it's a variety of nationalities and races. Queens, which is part of my district, is the most diverse county in the entire country. We have like 150 different languages and different nationalities in the borough. My Senate district, we have German, Italian, Jewish, Islam, Muslim community. Arabs. We also
have any Egyptians?
We have Egyptians, we have Pakistani, we have Bangladesh, Indian population, Chinese, Korean. It's hard to keep up with the different sections of the population. And that's part of my job, is to make sure that everybody feels part of the governmental process and feels that their views are being expressed and being addressed.
Do you think it's difficult to handle people from different backgrounds, especially like they're completely different people?
It is difficult, but I find that's a challenge for me. When I was in the New York City Council, my district was basically 80% white, you know, Italian, German, Jewish. My Senate district is much more diverse. So in the past 4 years that I've been in the Senate, it's been a process of reaching out to those different communities and working with them more than I ever had done before in the New York City Council, especially, for example, the Muslim community.
Do you have any remarks about the Arabic community?
Well, I think the Arab community faces some very tough issues today. And one of the things that I've been working on are several pieces of legislation to sort of address their specific needs. One of the things that is very interesting, that was actually brought to my attention by the Sikh community that are from India. And that is, in New York State, we have the Religious Corporations Law, which allows the various religions to incorporate and get certain tax advantages under the tax code in New York State. I was shocked to find out that the Islamic religion, the Sikh religion, and the Hindu religion were treated differently than the other major religions in New York State. In other words, they weren't getting the same tax benefits as, let's say, the Christian religions or the Jewish religion or some of the other Christian faiths.
Was that only in New York State or?
Only in New York State. I don't know what it is around the country, but in New York State, the tax code treated those religions differently.
Okay.
So I immediately introduced the bill for Hindu, the Muslim community, and the Sikh community to be treated the same. I'm happy to say that that bill passed the Senate. I haven't got it past the Assembly yet, but I'm hopeful that if we go back for a special session this year, it will pass. If not, I'll reintroduce it next year. But that, I was absolutely shocked, because here in America we think that everybody's religion is supposed to be treated the same under the federal U.S. Constitution. So it just goes to show you that each neighborhood, each community, each religion has different issues. I'm also trying to work with the Muslim community that any neighborhood, any school in my Senate district, in the state of New York, that would have a 25% Islamic population would be entitled to have halal food in the public schools, because that is a religious requirement. That bill is hopefully moving ahead. And the other bill I have is that in terms of the colleges and universities in the state of New York, that for the 2 high holy Muslim holidays, that the Islamic students would be given those days off. Because right now, if you're Muslim and you have those 2 main holidays, in fact, one is being celebrated, this weekend, you would have to celebrate the holiday, you would have to miss your courses, you may have to miss an important test. And if the Christian and Jewish religions can have days off from the school system, why not the Muslim community as well?
Sure. But if those are going to be observant by the Muslims, or it's going to be nationwide?
No, it would be
by
by all students in the state of New York for higher education. That's my bill. I'm also a co-sponsor of the bill that would have the same holidays observed in elementary schools and junior high schools.
Do you see any support from the Arab community? And
well, that's one of the things that I've been working on in the last couple of years, because I've been working on these bills for several years, is to get the Arab community mobilized so that they can realize you can have an impact on the political system. So right now we have like 1,000 letters of support from the Islamic community in my Senate district alone, supporting these 3 bills. And I think that's one thing that's very important for the Muslim community, to get organized and realize that you can have an impact on the political system. And one of the other things that I've been trying to work with various nationalities and religions in my district is to get them more involved in the political process. I want somebody from the Muslim community, the Sikh community, to run for political office. I was actually the first incumbent to ever support a Sikh candidate for public office. And the person was actually running for the city council in my Senate district. Didn't win, but it was a step forward. And it's a pride within those neighborhoods and those communities to realize you can be part of the American government as well, but you have to organize. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do.
what's your intake, Senator, about what's going on in Egypt nowadays?
Well, I think it's a good process that, Egyptians are starting to feel that they can have a say, and they're going towards more democracy and more freedoms. And I think that's something that should happen in every country across the world. I mean, I tend to think that the United States is the greatest democracy in the world, but we're not perfect. We still need to improve things. And I think every country where they may not have democracy, you could look towards us for examples, but it starts at home. There's an expression here in America, all politics is local. And in Egypt, start locally. People should speak up, and don't be afraid to do that, and change can happen. I mean, if you look at how this country was founded, we had a revolution against the biggest empire in the world at the time, and that was the British Empire. Nobody thought we could win, and yet we did. And we achieved independence, and we achieved a certain amount of democracy here.
What's your advice to the Egyptian population in the next few years in dealing with the new government, the new system, and do you think they should support?
Keep fighting for what you think is important. And, you know, with the internet, you can always go online now and find out what other countries are doing, how to get advice, and seek help in the United States. There are a lot of, I'm sure, you know, Islamic organizations that want to help what's going on in Egypt. I'm sure there are a lot of Egyptian organizations that are based here that want to help, you know, democracy flourish in Egypt. Don't be afraid to reach out overseas to enlist help and get advice.
We want to seek the proper advice, and we want to make sure we're not going to the wrong place. What do we do to learn to get to the right place and to seek the advice from?
Well, I think reach out to elected officials in the United States if you don't know specific groups. I always think, you know, I'm actually in contact, even though I'm in state government, I've had a lot of contact with a lot of embassies here because of New York City and the United Nations.
Sure.
And I've had ambassadors call me and ask me about the political situations here in the United States. So people in Egypt, you know, they can go online, they can reach me through my Senate website if they want. And I'd be happy to give advice or point them in the right direction in terms of groups here in the United States that can help them.
Do you think the Egyptian people now should support the current system that came in the office after all the two revolutions and after going through, you know, bad experience with the previous regimes and all?
Well, it's hard for me to comment because I'm not there.
Sure.
And only the Egyptians themselves know what's working, what's right, and what isn't. I just would encourage them, if you think it's not right, speak out, organize. Because
And if it's right, support?
If it's right, support it.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, you know, if they're doing something right and people don't support it, you could get something that's worse then.
And you get frustrated, you know,
Yeah, you
the
get very
government gets frustrated,
yeah.
right? Future planning, strategizing, what do we do for the peaceful process in the Middle East, from your perspective?
Well, this is a very tough, you know, subject, the entire Middle East.
Yes.
I think we have to have more dialogue. And I think, you know, from my perspective, and I say this even within my own district and sometimes within the city of New York, and I actually ran for mayor at one point in the Democratic primary for mayor in New York City. We have to get down to basics and realize we may have different nationality, we may have different cultures, we may have different religions, but almost every religion believes in the same thing: brotherhood, family, doing the right thing. And we all want to be able to prosper in our own community. We all want the best for our family. We all want the best for our children. We all want to live in a safe environment. And I think once everybody starts to understand, we basically all want the same things, no matter where we're coming from.
Sure.
Sit down, talk about where we agree and where we disagree, and trying to work out like an agenda for all of us, a way of life for all of us to follow. And I think in the Middle East, I think people have to start to understand we all have to get along. And violence should never be the answer. And if we can sit down and have a dialogue, we can move ahead. And I think we need more of a dialogue in the Middle East. And I think we have to move away from violence and terrorism. That's not helping the situation.
Senator Abella, what's your perspective about stereotyping? A lot of people say all Muslim people are bad. A lot of Muslim friends of mine who have been facing unnecessary discrimination. But at the same time, we hear that there's a lot of other terroristic groups who are Muslims, and they're destroying a lot of parts of the world. How can we deal with this?
Excuse me. Well, this is probably the most serious issue facing the Muslim community. There is a certain amount of animosity and discrimination because of the terrorist activity by some Islamic groups.
Extremists,
absolutely. I think here in the United States we have to recognize that this is a small portion of the population. It is not reflective of the Muslim community. It is not reflective of the Islamic religion. In fact, I think it's the opposite of what the Islamic religion teaches people. Whenever discrimination comes up here, I stand with the Muslim community to fight against it. I think what has to happen is the Muslim community itself has to be more vocal against the acts of violence and the acts of terrorism. I think the rest of the American population has to see that they're not all terrorists, that they do want to have the same quality of life. They do, in fact, excuse me, a lot of them are long-standing Americans. They're not new immigrants. They've been here for a long time. They're American citizens. I think that's what they have to do, is be more vocal against terrorism wherever it happens. And I think that would be more helpful to eliminate this stereotyping that goes on, which of course isn't correct.
Sure, and that applies to the Christian community and Jewish community. In other words, why don't everybody live in peace, live and let live? Right.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'm going to try and do is try and get the various religious communities to maybe have like a public statement like that, from the Jewish community, the Islamic community, the Christian community. I remember when I used to work for Ed Koch, who's a former mayor of New York City. He unfortunately recently passed away. But we had some acts of religious hatred, not against the Muslim community, when he was in office. And he had me, as one of his representatives, reach out to the various religions in one community in the borough of Queens. And this is way before I was ever elected to public office. And it was interesting to find that even though there may have been a church on this end of the block and a synagogue on this end of the block, nobody ever talked to each other. And that's one of the things that we tried to do, is get the religious leaders to talk to each other. And I think that's what has to happen. There has to be greater cooperation and dialogue between the various religious leaders, and then the public will see all the main religions of this world all believe in the same thing. But we have to speak out and show that we all agree in the same thing. And we all have to speak out against terrorism, whether it's anti-Semitic incidents, or whether it's attacks against the Islamic religion, or it's attacks against the Christian religion. All of that has to stop, but it's only going to stop if good people stand up. I remember when I was a kid, when I used to go and buy candy in the local candy store, the owner of the store had a little palm card on the cash register, and it said, all that evil has to do in this world to succeed is for good people to do nothing. And it's up to the good people to stand up against the violence and the hatred.
You think that dialogue should start from the bottom of the pyramid or the top of the pyramid?
I think it could be both, but I think it should always be from the bottom up.
Bottom up.
Always be from the bottom up, because we the people have the power. Government may have power because it exists, but the people, if they all stand together, can make significant change, and I think we saw that in Egypt.
Sure. I'm sure you heard of what's called ISIL and ISIS.
Yes. This is...
What's going on there?
I'm one of the more conservative people on this issue. I believe we should go in and send in troops. The United States should. This is a horrible, horrible tragedy that this organization, these extremists are conducting throughout the Muslim community, and other religions in Afghanistan and in Syria. This is pure evil. And we as good people have to stand up and fight it and help the people that are running from it. I mean, there are thousands, tens of thousands of refugees that are fleeing this organization. And the fact that they're beheading people, they're forcing people to bow down to their will, is just disgraceful.
It was thought to be our government were supporting this group in the past, and that's how this group became so powerful. Do you think this is a true statement?
I don't think so. I think this group, because of the fact that there was so much military hardware that was abandoned during the Syrian war, the Afghanistan war, all the wars unfortunately in the Middle East, They just took advantage of this. And apparently they took advantage of the civil war in Syria as well. And I don't think it's the government supporting them. I think it's these extremists have just taken advantage of the situation.
Because it doesn't make sense that we made them and now we're going to fight them. It's just...
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
You think it's a danger to the U.S.?
I think it's a danger to any civilized nation. And again, whether it's an individual or a country, when evil exists, I think it's up to the good countries and good people to stand up and say, this is wrong, and we have to fight it.
Do you think it took us a little long to react to their criminal and absurd killing and destroying human rights laws everywhere in the world? Do you think we should have acted a little earlier?
I think we should have acted earlier. I think we definitely should have acted earlier. And I think, sometimes governments are slow to move, but I think in this case we should have acted earlier.
Do you have any hopes for the Middle East to be any better?
It has to get better. It has to get better.
There's no other way around.
Yeah, there's no way around. Because the major religions came out of the Middle East.
Yeah.
All the three major religions of the world came out of the Middle East. We have to work together, and we have to resolve this one way or the other.
You think the stability of Egypt would help in stabilizing the rest of the Middle East?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Egypt has to be a major player in what happens in the Middle East. And I think the United States, we look towards Egypt to be a major player.
Senator, you seem to have a passion for public service. The range of legislation you proposed is staggering. One was titled Demolition by Neglect. What all does it entail?
In New York City, being an old city is like cities around the world, like Cairo is. We have a very strong preservation law. In other words, we want to preserve those old buildings and save them. We have what we make them landmarks, which means they're protected and they can't be destroyed. In New York City, we have one of the strongest landmark preservation laws in the country. But there was a huge loophole in the law that if an owner of a landmark property wanted to deliberately destroy it, he could get away with it. And there was one example on one of the 5 boroughs in the city of New York where it was a 1-story old schoolhouse, when years ago the schoolhouse was just one room. And the person wanted to get rid of it so they could build up. So they went in there during the dead of winter, they opened all the windows, they turned all the faucets on, let the water run, the pipes burst, the walls fell apart, and the building had to be demolished. And we lost a New York City landmark. So I introduced a bill that would allow the city of New York to go after a developer who deliberately neglected a New York City landmark to the point that it would have to be demolished. It gave the city of New York the power to sue the owner of the property for 3 times as much money as the property was worth. That has already saved double-digit landmarks in the city of New York.
Sure.
I was very proud of that bill, and it was supported by every preservation group in the country.
So, so that also could be interpreted in a different way for the Egyptian people, that in a certain period of time, a group of extremists wanted to destroy the Sphinx and the pyramids, and so the government should have
the power to be able to preserve that and
Yes.
protect it and go after anybody who wants to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We always look towards the future, but we also must preserve the past. And if there's an old...
Even if we don't agree with what happened in that past, but it's a civilization.
It's part of our history.
It's a history. We need to learn about it. We need to know it. We need to preserve it and see it.
And if we made mistakes in the past, we need to learn from them.
Sure. Senator Avella, it was a pleasure to have you in my show. And
Well, thank you for having me.
one last word to say to my viewers. Any advices for them? Any advice?
I always tell people, I don't care what your country from, get involved. Don't think that you can't influence your own government. The more people that get involved, the more representative it is, and the more the government is going to have to address the needs, not only of the whole, but of the individual as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Real
you.
pleasure.
Pleasure.